Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Councillor Ian Edwards. I'm Leader of the Council and I'm Chairman of the Cabinet. My apologies to members of the public who may have been expecting us to be online earlier. There was a fire alarm in the Civic Centre, required our evacuation, and we have only just been allowed to re-enter the building. So we will swiftly move on with the agenda. Please, Mark.
Chairman, apologies for absence. We have apologies from Councillor Jonathan Bianco.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, declarations of interest in matters before this meeting. Are there any additional declarations? None indicated. To approve the minutes of the last Cabinet meeting, and that's on pages 1 to 8, are those minutes agreed? Thank you. And item 4 is to confirm that there are items in both Part 1 and Part 2 of this meeting. Part 1 is a public meeting, with members of the public are not only invited to attend, but also can follow us online. And that is the substantive part of these agenda items. Part 2 are the private matters, and these tend to be commercial in nature. The actual issue is published and the decision, and also we provide a preview of the matters to be considered in Part 2 to give more information, as we are endeavouring to be as transparent as we can on those matters that we have to retain confidentiality on. So we will move into Part 1 of the meeting, and I'm going to reorder the agenda slightly, as it makes more logical sense in terms of the delivery of the items. And we'll move on with agenda item 11 first, which is the monthly Council Budget Monitoring Report. Councillor Goddard.
Thank you, Leader. And I need to start this report with an apology for the fact that 3 reports, this one on the current year budget monitoring, the budget and medium-term financial forecast, and the school's budget, have been delivered and published late. These items are contained within Pack B of the papers that you have in front of you. I should also mention that the elements dealing with the Council's capital programme were added as an addendum in respect of Appendix Item A8. The reason for the delays is due to the fact that difficulties were encountered in understanding and finalising the final local government settlement. There were issues relating to lack of clarity so far as concerns the multi-year settlement. And in addition to that, the finance team suffered in terms of staff resourcing constraints. I do acknowledge that these delays are unacceptable, and we are working to achieve a position where they will not recur again in the future. So, turning to the Budget Monitoring Report itself, this is a report of projected results for the full financial year to the 31st of March 2023, as they stood at the 31st of December 2022. The overall position financially of the Council continues to be stable, strong and encouragingly predictable. And indeed, we're continuing to receive the early stage benefits of our extensive transformation programme. Turning to the General Fund revenue account, an underspend of £82,000 against budget was achieved, and this reflects a small positive variance of £21,000 against the previously reported month 7 position, but still there is a great degree of consistency. Our general balances continue to be projected at a year-end position of £26.8 million. Continuing pressures arising from COVID-19 are projected at £14.9 million, which is lower than last year, but still £3.6 million greater than budget, and this overspend is being absorbed within earmarked reserves. I'm sure that I don't need to remind colleagues that central government funding for COVID pressures ceased at the 31st of March 2022, and hence the full cost for 22-23 and later years is being absorbed by this Council. Whilst inflation has had a highly material impact upon our costs, and that a substantial element of this has also been absorbed within earmarked reserves, we now have central government statistics, however, which reveal that the Consumer Price Index has shown a small reduction for the 3rd successive month. And this has started to be reflected in greater stability in our costs, particularly with regard to energy and fuel costs and the levels at which outsourcing contracts can be renegotiated. Perhaps this is an indicator that inflation levels have peaked, but in my view, it's far too early to reach that judgment. Excuse me. Furthermore, a number of our transformation and cost-saving measures have started to kick in to beneficial effect. However, I must emphasise that the need to retain and rebuild our reserves remains a major priority now and in the year ahead. Our programme of savings for 22-23 is progressing well, and we're now on track for the entire £13.3 million worth of savings in the programme to be delivered. General Fund capital expenditure for the financial year is projected to be £14.4 million below the revised budget number, largely due to delays in the commencement of agreed projects. Substantial elements of this expenditure is expected to be rephased into later financial years. The dedicated schools grant position has also suffered from cost inflation in respect of the high needs placements, to the tune of £724,000 in excess of budget. However, the projected year-end deficit is showing a further reduction to £21.9 million, which is still £1.6 million lower than last year's closing position. The housing revenue account continues to report a close adherence to budget, with a forecast surplus against budget of £68,000, being a £17,000 improvement on the position reported at month 7. Housing revenue account capital expenditure for the year will be £7.6 million below revised budget, and this, like the General Fund, is largely due to project delays and is expected to be rephased into later years. I therefore move recommendation 1 within Part A of the report, set out on page 260 of Pack B. At Part B of the report, on page 287 of the Pack, sets out a number of recommendations itemised A to E, all of which are self-explanatory. I therefore also move these recommendations. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you to Councillor Gollard, and thank you for confronting directly the late publication of the reports. That, to your explanation, was helpful to us. Colleagues, are the recommendations 1 and 2 on page 260 and A to E on 287 agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. Turn to agenda item 5, which is the Council's budget to the medium-term financial forecast for 2023-24 through to 2027-28. Councillor Gollard.
Thank you once again, Leader. This is a report on the budget and the medium-term financial forecast for the 5-year period 23-24 to 27-28 that will, with Cabinet's approval, be submitted to full Council on Thursday the 23rd of February next. Colleagues will be familiar with the consultation budget, which was approved at December Cabinet, and a relatively small number of changes have been made in arriving at this finalised version. These changes are largely as a result of receiving the final local government settlement and are summarised on page 6 of Pack B as far as the General Fund revenue account is concerned. I'll therefore comment on the material headlines of the final budget. First of all, as far as council tax is concerned, there is no change in that the core council tax will be set as an increase of 2.99%, with in addition to that 2% increase for the social care precept. In terms of fees and charges, no material changes have been identified or put through, although there are 1 or 2 very minor amendments made. One of the key elements in the changes that are made is in terms of improvements in the settlement and in terms of the Better Care Fund. These in combination yield an extra £3.8 million, and this will be deployed in removing the need to use any of our earmarked reserves to balance the 23-24 budget. In addition, we have extra income in the form of a dividend from Hillingdon First, which is our captive construction company, in the sum of £750,000. Turning to our costs, one particular item is that we are going to be incurring slightly higher debt service costs, and this is largely due to the result of some lower than projected capital receipts and also some additional capital expenditure which has been built in, and in particular a contingency of £20 million which will take care of cost inflation, which is particularly high in the construction sector. Generally, inflation assumptions have been eased, and in the 2 last years of the MTFF, these have been reduced from 4% to 2%, and this is consistent with the view of expert forecasters. Notwithstanding the prior year pledge of a multi-year financial settlement, we have remaining material uncertainties as to the levels of funding for the deferred fair cost of care reforms, and for that reason a provision of £5.1 million has been made in this respect. Furthermore, there is no clarity as to the level of the public health grant in the later years of the MTFF. The General Fund Capital Programme shows an increase of £28.6 million, and so in total this represents a figure of £368.6 million. The overall effect of these changes is that we have balanced budgets for the years 23-24 and 24-25. In the later years of the MTFF, we have a budget gap of £9.7 million, which is very slightly up on the consultation budget. And I should point out to colleagues that this is very largely attributable to the absence of information about the local government settlement in the later years of the MTFF. And I might add that approximately there's about £5.5 million of that £9.7 million gap is in this respect. Turning to the housing revenue account, there are no changes from the consultation budget in substance. So in essence, we have a 7% increase in the rents being taken in, which of course is the capped level that the government has imposed. This of course is materially less than the prevailing rate of inflation, and it will be necessary for us to give some attention to the cost structures of the housing revenue account during the next year or so. A capital programme amounting to £564.6 million will see the creation of 890 new homes across the term of the MTFF, and indeed also will include an investment of £195 million in the improvement of existing housing stock. In summary, this is a sound and prudently constructed budget which recognises that we continue to operate in a challenging financial environment of high inflation, a continuing COVID legacy, and growing demand for social services, against a backdrop of flatlining central government grants. Our other income sources being council tax and business rates, and these are constrained at levels of increase which are also well below the levels of current inflation. And that creates the imperative for us to identify and devise yet further efficiency, business process and modernisation savings, which will allow us to provide and preserve our key frontline services. It's a budget which does not place a continuing reliance on reserve drawdowns, but recognises the need to preserve and rebuild them following their very necessary use in 22-23. Leader, I therefore recommend recommendations 1 to 6, which are set out on page 2 of Pack B. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gollard. May I just please, before we move those or take the vote on those, just confirm the accuracy of the dates in the recommendations. It could be my misunderstanding here, but I want to confirm that the pay policy statement is for 22-23 and not 23-24. And similarly, the use of reserves and balances is for the present year and not for next year. Or has this been an error in construct? And I must point out, we were prevented from resolving this matter prior to the meeting by the fire alarm and our need to immediately move into this meeting. This is something that ordinarily is resolved outside of this meeting.
I would have to check the position on the pay policy statement. I'm not sure about that, but Leader, I am as sure as I can be that the point 4, utilisation of general reserves and balances, would be in respect to 23-24.
Councillor Mills.
From memory, I think the pay policy statement should refer to the forthcoming year, and therefore it's been a typo.
That would have been my expectations, and my apologies for drawing this out at the last moment. It was only as I was at this stage we hadn't resolved it prior to the meeting because of the alarm. But with those amendations that we are talking about, the years 23-24, yes, and in item 4 as well. So we are changing those 2 years, yes. So recommendation 1 is as published, 2 is confirm that that is correct, the years, 22, 23 through to 26, 20? Or should that be amended as well?
I think item 2 should be 23, 24 to 27, 28.
Fine, so we'll amend recommendations 2, 3 and 4 to show the present, for 23, 24 and beyond. Thank you very much. So are those 5 recommendations agreed and the 6th noted?
Agreed and noted.
Agreed and noted. Thank you very, very much. My apologies for that. It is most unfortunate that that matter of housekeeping couldn't have been resolved prior to the meeting, and my apologies for that. Okay, we're now going to move on to agenda item 7, the school's budget for next year. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Leader. So this evening I would like to propose agenda item 7, the school's budget for 2023-2024, which has already been through the consultation process with our relevant stakeholders, including Schools Forum. Cabinet will be aware that last year the Council came to an agreement with the Department for Education for a 5-year safety valve agreement that will allow for the deficit on the dedicated schools grant to be eliminated over that period of time. The Council currently sends quarterly transparent monitoring reports to the DfE, highlighting the work that it is doing. The dedicated schools grant funding is driven by pupil numbers, which has increased by 6.2% this year, and this is in Table 1 on page 235. However, Table 2 shows not only the increase in funding for pupil numbers, it also includes the increase in numbers of pupils accessing the high needs block. And although children already with an EHCP, an Educational Health Care Plan, are accounted for, this leaves a difference in funding for those pupils who are just starting on an EHCP. There has been a decrease in the Central Services Grant, also in Table 2, which is not unexpected, as this was last set in 2013-2014, when the factors in calculating the formula were reduced due to the government's commitment to conversion to academies. The government's white paper that was launched in March 2022 has since been put on hold. However, this was not the case for the formulas that are in this table this evening. There continues to be mounted pressures that is driven by the increasing expenditure of the high needs block, which is the portion of the schools grant that funds children with special educational needs and includes the top-up funding. I refer Cabinet to the table on the top of page 236, highlighting a £3.617 million deficit under the high needs block. This is made up of £2.3 million of the known deficit that is part of the current safety valve agreement, and this will balance out over the lifetime of the agreement. However, unexpectedly when consulted, the Schools Forum did not support the 0.5% block transfer of the school's block funding to offset the ongoing funding pressures. This 0.5 equates to the 1.33 million that is that makes up the total of the £3.617 million. The Council has made a disapplication request to the Department for Education regarding this decision, and should this be successful, the £1.3 million will balance off against the safety valve agreement, as was expected by the Council originally. The schools block, including the high needs block, must be approved by Schools Forum, and Cabinet will note that the Schools Forum have approved both the early years part of the budget, including the centrally retained items, as well as the central schools service budget when they last met in January 2023. As nationally, all local authorities move closer to the prescriptive national funding formula, which has been talked about for very many years, officers have used as close to the 10 set agreed factors as possible and has attained most of these factors. Unfortunately for Hillingdon, the looked after children factor is no longer allowable as part of this, and as an authority that has a high proportion of the UAS children, unaccompanied asylum seeking children, this does not work in our favour. This year there has been a welcome increase in the early years funding block allocation, as the updated factors have not been addressed since 2017. as well as early years pupil premium, which has also been increased. The good news is that this supports better outcomes for those less advantaged 3 and 4 year olds, and is overall good news for 2, 3 and 4 year old early years providers, including our maintained nursery schools. The Council continues to scrutinise the independent and non-maintained special needs placements that are out of our borough and which continue to increase, and due to the saturation of capacity within borough. Councillor Gollard referred to this earlier on in the MTFF, in the actual budget. And however, we do seek to address this with our safety valve agreement in creating extra capacity in borough. However, I will state that this has come at a time of increased pressure nationally and globally, with the cost of labour, materials, as well as workforce and inflationary demands. As in previous years, this council continues to be a high delegator, therefore very little is retained centrally, and with nearly all of the grant going to schools, and the proportion that is retained are for centralised services, for example, the admission service, school improvement services and the such. The recommendations are set out on page 234, and I'm going to ask that the recommendations are agreed, but I will just point out a couple of things, if you don't mind. I won't read out all of the recommendations. Point 1 is to agree that the total school budget for 2023-24 is set. Recommendation 2, to approve the primary and secondary schools funding formula. Number 3 was to note the early years single funding formula allocation. I'll point out that this is going back to consultation to Schools Forum in March. Approved the early years centrally retained budget, approved the central school services budget, and also number 6, to note the indicative budget for the high needs block of 62,084, which will be presented to Schools Forum on the 20th of March, I knew March was in there, as part of the ongoing consultation. Additionally, noting that the block is also subject to the disapplication request being considered by the Department for Education for the 0.5% transfer. And item number 7 is to cover off those other 2 items that we've noted, that if any further approval is required regarding the school's budget for 23-24, that authority is delegated to my colleague, the Cabinet Member for Finance, and to myself as the Member for Children's, Family and Education, and this is in consultation with the Corporate Director of Finance. Thank you. I therefore move.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, are the 7 recommendations, 5 of which are for agreement and 2 for noting, are they agreed and noted?
We agree.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 6, the referral from full council of Hillingdon's council plan of action against ULEZ. Councillor Mills.
Thank you, Leader. The recommendations from this report are at the top of page 10. And I duly move those for Cabinet consideration. Since the Council met and discussed this and asked for Cabinet to produce this paper, an awful lot has been happening in the world of ULEZ, as I'm sure most people are aware, including more authorities expressing their alarm and concern about the implications, including, of course, not just authorities within the Greater London area, but all of the surrounding county councils on the approaches to London. And indeed, concern has also extended to various members of Parliament, and I believe there are 4 notable Outer London Labour MPs who have now saying exactly what we were saying at that council meeting. Maybe they watched us on YouTube and realised that they needed to join that particular aspect. In terms of Hillingdon, I know that at least 2 of our MPs, for Ruislip, Northwood and Pinner, Uxbridge and South Ruislip, have also come out very clearly to say that this is not beneficial to the residents of their areas. And indeed, we are aware that our member for Ruislip, Northwood and Pinner is working procedurally with the House of Lords to see what can be done on that score. In respect of our 3rd Member of Parliament, I have to admit I haven't seen or heard anything that is as supportive as the others. I could speculate that he's busy trying to keep Jeremy in a job in Islington, but that would be pure speculation. In terms of what we can do, and with these recommendations, this allows us to maximise the powers which we have as a local authority to take action that actually protects and benefits our local residents against aspects which we believe will be fundamentally detrimental to their day-to-day activities. And on ULEZ, that is absolutely crystal clear and becoming clearer as each day and each announcement by the Mayor is made, that we need to stand up and make sure that this is opposed as best we can. You will be aware, Leader, and you may wish to comment, that today we have, jointly with not just other London councils, but also, and I think this is significant, with Surrey County Council as well as a partner, started the full legal process of a judicial review, and there will be more of that as that plays out over the next coming weeks. And I thank our officers, and in particular our Borough Solicitor, in terms of the work as he has been leading on behalf of all these boroughs in terms of getting to the state where we can launch such an action and request the Mayor to be considered in a court of law the actions that he has taken. What this primarily does is allow us to advise our residents and keep them informed of what is happening and offer them as much support as possible, not only in trying to bring to an end this risk of cameras and signage appearing between now and August and it becoming implemented, but also making sure they are fully aware of what mitigation is available to them, even though one of our arguments is that the mitigation that is being suggested by the Mayor of London falls woefully short of anything which would be beneficial. And I'm sure many of us have already had examples of number of residents who have non-compliant cars who would not qualify for the scrappage scheme, and even if they did, the amount involved would not give them the opportunity to purchase other vehicles. And I think one of the things that we need to keep pressing home is almost the law of unintended consequences. The number of particularly elderly people who by and large seem to be the ones that have a lot of these older non-compliant cars, who will become more and more isolated. And indeed I had a resident in my own ward who said, if I lose my car, then I'm going to end up being isolated more and more at home and will end up being a burden upon the council even more than it was likely to be the case. The other thing which we will clearly do is, and the maps which have been attached in the appendix to this report are all part of this, is to really make clear that the narrative that is coming out from City Hall about pollution levels and the statistics being quoted are a lot of nonsense, and they are selected facts chosen at random to suit a particular story. But then we know that this Mayor of London, why would he let facts get in the way of his prejudice against Outer London and the people of Hillingdon in particular? It is quite clear, and for the avoidance of doubt, let's make it absolutely clear, in terms of the two main measures that TfL used in their own report, on one of them, over 90% of the borough of Hillingdon is performing better than what they consider to be a risk element. And in respect of the other one, and bearing in mind the other one, we have Heathrow Airport within our borough, in respect of the other measure from TfL, just under 60% of the borough is performing better than what TfL. So there is no actual evidence to suggest, and indeed the TfL reports in their submission say there'll be negligible benefits of having low emission zone in outer London boroughs such as Hillingdon. So it's a complete and utter nonsense that is being spoken. It's the wrong scheme, it's hitting the wrong people, it's not solving the problem, and as everyone will know, this authority has taken air quality seriously for many years, which is why we have been at the forefront of the arguments about Heathrow Airport expansion, because, amongst other things, the impact of air quality on our residents, especially in the south of the borough. By moving these recommendations, we have this ability to take appropriate action to inform and advise and to activate on behalf of our residents against an unwarranted tax on the people of Hillingdon.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mills. In my limited experience of local politics, just a decade, nothing has caused quite the anger amongst our residents as this extension of ULEZ. The Mayor's assertions around air quality are just not accepted by people who every day go about their business in Hillingdon and experience air quality, and the fact that our air quality is by and large of a good standard. But what they are against is the unfairness of the charge that is being hoisted on the shoulders of low-income families, elderly families, and those least able to adapt. I am very proud that Hillingdon has come together as a council to stand with residents and challenge the Mayor. And I am enormously proud that we have been able to join together with other local authorities. And I do thank most sincerely the role of the borough solicitor. It has been a tough ask not only to represent one borough, but to do so for 5 authorities is a challenge, and he must be congratulated for having got us this far. The challenge that we started today is not the end of the journey. We are looking at the Mayor's powers, assumed powers, asserted powers, to put signage up in our roads. We do not believe that that is the case. We believe that the method of he has chosen to implement this expansion of ULEZ removes those powers, and we will be asserting that directly to him in our response, and we'll be taking further legal advice, and if necessary, and if supported by that legal advice, we will take further legal action should he trespass on our land. I'm delighted that we have pulled together this action plan. We will stand up for our residents just as we stood up with them, and will continue to stand up with them against the expansion of Heathrow Airport. Colleagues, are these 7 recommendations agreed? Thank you. Agenda item 8, the consultation on Hillingdon's library strategy. Councillor Lavery.
Thank you, Leader. The report, which begins on page 19, is a consultation on our draft strategy for 2023 to 2027, including the tiered opening hours table. Libraries in this borough are a key service of which we are rightly proud, and this strategy builds on past work which will keep libraries at the heart of all of our communities. In addition to their key function of giving access to books and ensuring we are a digitally inclusive borough, they provide many other activities for all sections of the community, and as such contribute to the health and well-being of our residents. They provide an important source of information for local communities, as well as signposting to other council services. The programme activities in our libraries will, in conjunction with other council services, be further developed in the coming years. The draft strategy is a very good read, and I do recommend it, and I wish to put my thanks to both officers in the library team and the communications team for the work involved in pulling it together and actually making it a very readable document, because occasionally these things can be a little dry. Following the conclusion of the consultation, the strategy will, and the consideration of comments received, the strategy will return to Cabinet to be formally adopted. There are 3 recommendations on page 20, which is to approve the strategy for consultation, agrees as part of that to consult on the new hours, and agrees to receive the final strategy at a later meeting once the consultation has been considered. I move the recommendations.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lavery. This is a good news story, the fact that we are continuing to support our libraries and invest in them and expand their role. And in part 2, we will hear a little bit more about further development of our libraries, whereas other authorities are under pressure and looking to make cuts. We are continuing to invest, and we will continue to do so. Colleagues, are these 3 recommendations agreed? Thank you. Agenda item 9, the consultation on the future of Harlington Library.
Thank you, Leader. The report begins on page 43. Harlington Library is one of our current 17 public libraries, but is rather unique in the fact that it is actually set within the grounds of Harlington School, and it actually operates from premises which we lease from Harlington School. The Equalities Impact Assessment is clear that in fact this is really a school library which operates as a public library. The vast bulk of its use is by 12 to 17-year-olds Monday to Friday and during term time, oddly enough when the school is open. The school is currently being rebuilt and the new library will be further into the school grounds and not visible from the public highway. The consultation proposes to close the public library, gifting the current library stock to the school for use as a new school library. There are alternative libraries within reach, and also the mobile library does serve this area. I therefore move the recommendations on page 44.
Colleagues, are these three recommendations agreed? Thank you. Agenda item 10, changes to the admissions criteria for community schools. Coteford Infant School. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Leader. I propose agenda item 10 this evening on the changes to admissions criteria for community schools, expressly Coteford Infant School. The four recommendations are set out on page 60. The consultation responses can be found from pages 63 of the paper, and Cabinet will know that Hillingdon Council has a statutory responsibility to secure sufficient school places for children residing in Hillingdon. The demographic is now changing, with Hillingdon, along with most London boroughs, experiencing a reduction in pupil numbers in early years and primary schools. It is important to plan sufficiency with our schools, as funding is based on per pupil numbers. Therefore, a school becoming undersubscribed puts a burden on a school's budget, its resources and the possibility of a deficit budget, which can and has in some instances put the council in a position whereby a maintained school may seek an application for the council to cover a loan which would come from an already stretched dedicated schools grant. As I've previously said, the recommendations are on page 60. There are four of them, and I therefore move. I do apologise. I will just add as well that recommendation number 4 is also that the council supports an additional PAN reduction from Grange Park Infant and Nursery and the junior school. So this is a non-community school, it's an academy school, whereby they have already provided their consultation, and we're not unhappy with that offer. I therefore move. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bryan. Are the four recommendations agreed? Thank you. We're now turning to agenda item 12, which is the public preview of matters to be considered in private. Councillor Lavery, you wish to speak on this?
I do, thank you, Leader. In fact, I'm going to, in the absence of Councillor Bianco, I will add a comment on item 13, which I think is appropriate. Item 13, I was talking about library strategy earlier in this meeting, and item 13 is a good example of our investment in libraries, where we plan to redevelop and rebuild a brand new library at Northwood Hills. So I'm sure residents will be absolutely delighted with that when that comes on stream. The other item I wish to draw attention to is item 15, which is the provision of waste weekends. This is a report confirming that we intend to maintain the popular waste and recycling weekends in the south of the borough, which are much valued by residents. They reduce carbon emissions by eliminating unnecessary travel and also provide a way of reusing products that would all otherwise be dumped. So again, a good news story for residents.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, is that report noted? Yep, thank you. We're now going to go into part 2, please.